And we're live here at Friday, the 3rd of July. Great to see you all connected. I see we have quite a good group joining us this Friday, the 3rd of July. And again, let's get the chat working. I can see some of you already let us know where you are connecting from. One of the things that has fascinated me with YouTube is how global a community this channel and this platform allows us to develop. And also today the theme is entrepreneurship, and what I'd love is questions. What questions do you have about entrepreneurship, about leading a life as an entrepreneur, about getting up and going, about continuing once you've got going? Stick them there in the chat. And let's go over to our chat cam here. So on chat I can see we have Abir, Niraj, Vigas from Lithuania, Pooja Zindi. How to make a habit to read more books. That's a great question. Abir, how to deal with negative people in both your business and personal life. I think that's a very important one. Chadia, great to have you here from Lebanon. Jagannath, great to have you. Niraj, entrepreneurship gets restricted when you think of the negative side due to the family commitments, hence less of entrepreneurs. Is this true? We'll definitely get there. Smile, Leeds. I went to university in Nottingham, so not too far away from Leeds. Alan, great to have you on. Yongfeng, Jordi from Barcelona, just down the road. And we're starting to open up here, out of lockdown. The border over to Portugal and to France opened Wednesday this week, so it feels like some semblance of normal is coming back to our lives. Alba, great to see you on here. We've got Daniel from Montreal, Bob from Arkansas, Yokohama, Japan. It must be fairly late at night there, Tomoki. Chadia, what is the first thing to work on when starting your own business? Oh, Rose, great to see Bigas and Riel's connected here. Rose, a person is defined by what he or she does or he is. That's a good question. I'm going to start here with Rose's question. It's a broader thing than just entrepreneurship. Let's switch over here. And what defines us? What makes us? And about 5 years ago, a very good friend of mine, Bill, we both started work at Accenture around the same time, and we became very good friends and remain good friends. He was over here in Spain with his family a couple of years back. And I remember a conversation with Bill. Bill told me about a mentor of his. And the mentor had been instrumental when he was young in helping him get clarity on who he was and find a path for himself. And this mentor was a Catholic priest. And the mentor had passed away in the year just previous to us being together. And Bill had asked him, what's the greatest sin? And in one of the last conversations that they had, his mentor told him, the greatest sin is judging people for their productivity. And a few years ago, when Bill shared this with me, I thought, what a strange idea, that the greatest sin is to judge people for their productivity. What on earth does this mean? And I discovered in myself that, I think judging people for the color of their skin, that's not something they control over. So I don't do that, or at least to the extent possible, I go out of my way to make sure that I'm not giving opportunity to white people with the same color skin and the same background as me. But where I do find that it's very easy for my brain to jump into a judgmental mode is where somebody is not working hard, if someone is not using the talents that they've been given, someone has a lot of potential but isn't putting it to use by doing the work, by putting discipline to the talent that they bring into life. And I found that I find it so easy to judge myself as productive and to judge others as unproductive. And this is such a dangerous little beginning. And I guess why this guy saw it so dangerous is that it's a slippery slope. As soon as you use any mechanism to judge someone as above you or below you, it gives your judgmental part of your mind access to begin judging everything and everyone. And there's a lot of judgments that I think are morally incorrect or ethically incorrect, and as a society we've kind of removed them. But particularly in Western society, in the capitalist society, it seems to be not only okay to judge people for their productivity, but actively positive. School, we grade students and we rank students 1 to 10, not by the color of their skin, not by their genetics, but by their performance on exams, in some way a proxy for productivity. And I guess the problem doesn't come in ranking people in terms of their capacity to do stuff. It comes when then you don't separate that from judging their value as a human being. And that human beings, each of us, just for being alive, are worthy. You don't need to do anything or be anything or have anything to be worthy as a human being. Your life, your experience, your essence of you is what makes you worthy. There's nothing you have to do, there's nothing you have to be, there's nothing you need to have to mean that your life and your life energy is vitally important, not just to you, but to this universe. And to me, the question, I guess, in the theme of entrepreneurship, a business does need productive employees. The challenge is when you start judging people. Certainly categorizing people and being able to identify who are the people that bring productivity. But for me, the challenge is how to do it without judging someone who's not productive as in any way a lesser human being. And I grew up in a society where my father's family would be very much about productivity, and what you do is your worth in the world. And if you're busy and if the world is keeping you busy, it's a good sign that you're a worthy human being. The last few years I've been trying to move away from any sense that the goodness or badness of a human being has to do with their productivity. So you're a worthy human being whatever you do. Now the question is, if you're an entrepreneur and you're bringing together a team, there enters a different decision. All human beings are worthy, but not all human beings are going to use the resources that you have and create the same output. And to me, the separation of the two, I didn't do it at the beginning. I used to judge people as lesser or more because of their ability to produce results, and judge people on my team for their quality as human beings based on the results that they achieved. Now, I have found a way of, as an entrepreneur, appreciating all people, but being able to take a decision about who's going to use the resources to the best of their ability. And that my role as leader, and the way this goes back to something that I remember from a conversation with Sequoia Capital. So back it's about 12 years ago, the last time I came close to taking a corporate job, to leaving my life as an entrepreneur and taking a paid salaried job. So this is probably 12 years ago. Sequoia Capital had acquired an insurance claims adjuster, and they were looking for someone to be the general manager for Europe for the company. And I had a series of interviews leading to a 2-hour interview with the founder of Sequoia Capital. And I had the privilege of on the phone speaking for 2 hours to this guy who had founded Sequoia Capital in over 30 years. They acquire businesses out of corporate, typically over $1 billion in turnover, and within 2 years they sell them on for 10 times the money. And I asked him, how do you do it? What does Sequoia Capital do that has allowed you to have this sustainable success over 30 years? And he told me that there are 3 rules in Sequoia Capital: 30-30, 80-20, 90-10. And that these three rules have been the core of all of the systemic success over 30 years financially on every measure of what they've done with these businesses. And these three rules, 30-30, when they acquire a business, the first thing that they do is ask every single person who works in the business to develop their own 30-30 plan. And their 30-30 plan is you need to develop your personal plan for how next year you will generate 30% more results using 30% less resources. So if you're in sales and you sold 1 million last year, you need a realistic plan for how you would sell 1.3 million this year. If you're managing purchasing, and maybe you're looking after the office supplies cabinet, if last year the company used 1,000 pencils, well, this year you need to show how you're going to reduce the usage of pencils to 700. And they say it can take a couple of weeks, but once everyone is clear that there is no option, there is no avoiding it, but you must create a plan 30-30 where you know over the next year how it would be possible for you to generate 30% more output using 30% less resources of the company. So 30-30 takes a few weeks, but eventually every single person in the acquired business has their 30-30 plan. The second, 80-20. Every single person in the business, from the CEO down to the most junior person who joined recently, needs to stop 80% of their activity. Whatever you have been doing, say you produce 10 reports each week, you decide which 2 reports are the most important and you stop producing the other 8. Say you attend 5 meetings every week. You decide which of those 5, which one is the most important, and you stop attending the other 4. And they said 80-20, this is harder. And what they said is any conflict is not resolved in the local business. So say I work for you and I decide that attending your weekly meeting is not one of the 20% most important activities for me to achieve my results, but you say that I should show up. We don't resolve it between us. It goes to California to have it resolved. And it's resolved based on what's your 30-30 plan, what's my 30-30 plan. Is this vital for us both achieving our 30-30 plan? And he said, both of these rules, 30-30 and 80-20, lots of companies in the world instill these behaviors and achieve this, that people are clear about their plan and people are asked to focus on the activities each year that are most important. He said it's the third rule, 90-10, that is the golden rule. It's the rule that no other company has been able to systemically, year after year, make sure that they apply. 90-10 is if somebody doesn't achieve their plan, 90% of the blame goes to their immediate supervisor. So if you have 5 people on your team and one of them fails to achieve their 30-30 plan, 90% of the blame goes to you, 10% stays with them. If you have a team of 5 and 2 do not meet their 30-30 plan this year, it's you that will be leaving the company, not them. And I said to him, isn't that a little bit harsh? And he told me, why does somebody not achieve the plan? There's only 3 reasons why somebody doesn't achieve their plan. Number 1, they don't know what the plan is. Boss's fault. Number 2, they don't have the resources necessary to achieve the plan. Boss's fault. Number 3, they're not motivated to do the work necessary to achieve the plan. And this time he said, now this is half their fault and half the boss's fault. The boss's job is to see what inspires you, what moves you, what you're strong at, and spot that where you are is not good for you or is not pulling the best out of you and make some changes, but not leave you there struggling. And he said that whenever they acquire the business, one of the things that they need to do early on is make sure some senior leader, some sacred cow that's been there for a long time, is visibly removed from their role, because even though they achieve their plan, a number of the people in their team do not achieve their plan. And that this is what leadership has to be if you're going to get results. Leadership is a responsibility that those around you are better because you're there. Leadership is not a place to hide behind your team. It's not a place to hide from others achieving or not achieving their objectives and removing them. And for me, the path of entrepreneurship is the path of taking complete and full responsibility for results. If you're in a corporate and you don't get results, but you look good and you look the part and you've made good friends, you'll probably stay around for a long, long time. If you're the owner of a startup business and your income depends on sales, and your income depends on bringing in a team capable of generating value for customers over and above the cost, it doesn't matter how many friends you have. It doesn't matter how good looking you are. It doesn't matter how wonderful your PowerPoint deck. It doesn't matter how many hours you show up in the right places and do the right work. If your sales are not higher than your costs, you're going out of business. And this is such a clarifier. I think when I began as an entrepreneur, I came out of 10 years of corporate, 10 years of working as a manager in a global company called Accenture. And what I'd learned was definitely how to be effective, but also a lot of how to appear effective. And the first 5 years of me as an entrepreneur, I think I looked more like a successful entrepreneur than I was an actual successful entrepreneur. Now I focus only on activity that really delivers results. And I also see that if someone in my team is struggling, I stop and think, are they clear what their plan is? Do they have the resources and the competency to achieve their plan? Are they motivated? And these three things are my responsibility. And if they don't have clarity about what the plan is, then I need to keep talking to them until I can see that they have clarity. And it needs to be their plan, not my plan. The second, I need to know, do they have the resources? And resources are both things outside of themselves and inside of themselves. Some of the resources that we need to achieve a plan are skills. To be able to speak well, to be able to work well with a team, to be able to motivate others, to be able to sell, to be able to program, to be able to deal with computers. And I do think it is the individual's responsibility, but it's the leader whose job is to really make sure that people have these three things. Clarity about what the work is, resources to get the work done, and the motivation to do it. And if these three things are in place, then I think you're on a good course. Now, I think Chadia, there was a question on what is, let me look back and find the question that Chadia asked. What my mind is, what's the first thing that you need to do as an entrepreneur? To hear, I think there needs to be a market for what you're going to deliver. A product with no market is a lot worse than a market with no product. A market with no product, there's a solution, build a product. A product with no market, there's no solution. You can't create a market for something out of nothing. I think the movie Field of Dreams with Kevin Costner, where Kevin Costner has a dream that if I build a baseball field in the middle of nowhere, they will come. And everyone around him tells him he's mad, but he builds a baseball field in the middle of his cornfield, and miraculously people do come. That happens in the movies. That doesn't happen as an entrepreneur. If you build it, they will come. No. I think when you're starting out as an entrepreneur, if there's a demand for solving a particular type of problem, you got to start there. Then you can build a product. Don't build the product first. Don't think about what you can do or what you enjoy doing first. Think about where's there a need in the market. I remember Peter Diamandis, who runs a mastermind group called Abundance 360. He talks very often about one of the best things as an entrepreneur that you can possibly do is solve a problem that was a problem to you. Don't solve problems that are problems to someone else. And an entrepreneur who spent 15 years working in corporate IT and had a very painful experience that was repeated year after year after year, and after 15 years of suffering a problem, decided, I need to build something to fix this. This is the best type of entrepreneur, because this person has lived the problem. This person knows exactly why the problem is a problem, knows how painful it is, knows how to talk about the problem, knows how to connect to other people that have the problem, is their own first testimonial. This is a very powerful place to start as an entrepreneur. The story of, one, two, or three people leaving MIT or a technical university and building a product and magically people come, this is a very, very rare occasion. And maybe it does lead to the Facebooks and the Googles of the world. But I think much, much more common is the entrepreneur in their mid to late 40s who has 20 years of experience of real corporate life, who has seen real problems and suffered them as a user, and really is only building the company because there was no other way of solving this problem. So I think, Chadia, find a market that has a problem before you find a product or a technology. When I go to technology accelerator events, I remember there's a professor, I think at IESE, and one of his rules at technology accelerator events is the word platform is banned. When you give your pitch, you cannot use the word platform. No user ever describes a product as a platform. There's no one who uses Facebook says, I'm looking for a platform where I can connect with my family and my friends. Users don't use the word platform. Only someone who's focused on the product, who's focused on the technology, who's focused on, I can create this. I don't know if anyone needs it, but I know I can create it. Only someone who thinks from that aspect uses the word platform to describe what they're building. And it's fascinating to see how hard some young technical people who've built something without necessarily knowing that there really is a demand for it. So to me, Chadia, the most important thing is know that there is a market for your product before you start building it. There's a book by Tim Ferriss, The 4-Hour Workweek, and I think I remember I avoided reading it for a long time because I just thought that Tim Ferriss just seemed to be a marketing gimmick guy, not someone who had really good deep thinking about life. I've changed my opinion over the years. I think Tim Ferriss is one of the best interviewers that I've come across anywhere, because he really has a curiosity for how to make things practical. And the book, The 4-Hour Workweek, I give that to more potential entrepreneurs than any book on entrepreneuring. And one of the things about the 4-Hour Workweek is it gives you very inexpensive methods to test whether there's a market for what your idea is before you invest in building it. I think one of the simple things that Tim Ferriss recommended is, imagine your idea is to build a coaching business around, coaching people to help redesign their home. And, you've got two paths. One, you could spend 2 years writing the book, developing the course, building everything. Or two, what Tim Ferriss recommends is you build a very simple web page, one page that just describes what the product is. And if you're interested, put your email and hit a button. And maybe you have a couple of these pages at different prices. and then you use Google AdWords or Facebook advertising to get 100 or 200 people who are targeted to visit the page. If nobody signs up, don't build a product. If 20% of all visits sign up at a significant price, well, now you've validated that there is interest at a good price for this product. And I think this idea that before you build anything, really get engaged with future users and use those future users to help you design the features and what's most important on the product. Do not build anything without engaging with someone who has money to pay for what you're building. Dan Sullivan often says, only talk to check writers. If you ask your mum what she thinks of your internet business, she'll say it's wonderful. If you ask your friends what they think of your web page, they'll say it's brilliant. It's only someone who has money and a problem that would be an ideal future customer to you. If they say yes, and I'd be willing to prepay for it, that you really know that there is latent demand for your product. And I guess all the businesses that I have built, I've built 6 businesses over the last 18 years. And in a way, they're all sales businesses. I've not built a Facebook or a Google. I've not built a platform that is somehow unique and alone. So any advice that I will be giving now, any experience that I'm sharing from, is sharing from creating businesses that are very much sales driven, where if I can get enough customers to pay for a thing, then the business will work. I guess drugs companies, if you're going to be a startup in the pharmaceutical industry, then you're probably going to have to spend 7 years developing the product. So you got to know something there or know how to finance it in a different way. So my advice is definitely geared up to businesses that deal either with businesses or consumers as their end goal. And let's see where we are back on the questions here. So I've seen a few chats coming through. So we're down. Bob, what is the difference between motivating and inspiring people? Good question. I don't know if I know the difference between motivating and inspiring. Let me think about what those 2 words would be and what the difference would be. Mariam, how do you know it's the appropriate time to start new business now after the pandemic? That's a good one. And I guess Mariam, again, it would go back to where there's a market. I think if you can finance a business out of prepayment for future delivery of a product, you're pretty sure that you're building something that there is a need for. So don't build things without knowing that there's demand for it. And I think there is I can't remember which book talks about this idea of the minimum viable product, that getting in the habit of what's the minimum amount that you need to build to be able to show somebody what your product could be, and only build the minimum viable product, and then get out and show it to 10, 15, 20 of the people who are in your ideal buyer persona. And if they can see something in your minimum viable product, and you can say, well, what would it be worth to you if we could have this? Would you be willing to prepay and be part of the feature development group so that we can really customize it to you? If you can do, yes. So Ruhan, Steve Blank, the lean startup method from Eric Ries. And this idea of don't start with the product. Don't start with the Kevin Costner Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. This is the way I started 3 of my first businesses. I thought I had an idea that was so wonderful and amazing, and spent a lot of money building it, got a lot of people involved in building it, and then found it was very, very, very difficult to get buyers to buy our product. What I learned in in TaxiJet, TaxiJet was building an airline of private jets. And what it struck me is I sold most of the private jets without showing someone an aircraft. I didn't need a jet in my garage to be able to sell the idea of an aircraft. And you can do a lot to sell a concept and show your plan to do it without having to show the finished product to someone and still get someone to buy and commit to your vision of the future. So I think this idea, I think Answer Tech, the Startup Owner's Manual, and Ruhan says the Lean Startup Method by Eric Ries. These two books, and Steve Blank has a lot of videos on this idea of minimum viable product, do the minimum necessary, and then get out into the world and find if you can get buyers for the minimum viable product with a vision of where you're going to go over the next couple of years. This is the best way of beginning a startup. Buitamelo, what's the advice for those who have to rebuild post this pandemic? How have rebuild a business after a crisis? So Buitamelo, that is an important question and a broad one. Maybe I'll switch over here for this one. Post-crisis, what do we do? And if you're running a hotel that has been closed for the last 3 months, that you've had zero income, you've had most of your staff at home, how do you restart after normality to some degree comes back? If you're a restaurant that's been closed for 3 months, how do you restart? If you're a supplier to a school, supplier to universities, supplier to restaurants that has been closed because the restaurants have been closed, how do you rebuild? And one of the things that we've been really thinking through with the CEOs in Vistage is the distinction between recovery and rebuild. And I think recovery is how do I get back to where I was before? Rebuild is how do I use this opportunity to rethink the fundamentals of our business, to rethink the fundamental capabilities that we're going to need in the future. And you used the word rebuild, which is I think what we want to be doing, not just aiming at recover. Just recovering back to where I was in February or January. This lockdown, this 3-month pause of economic activity is a wonderful opportunity to stop and really rethink a lot of the things that you do in business. And for me, one of the things that's so hard in a business is to stop something. It's often a lot easier to start new things than to stop old things. One of the stories that I remember that most captures this idea was shared with me from my father. And my father was a management consultant with Anderson Consulting back in the 1980s, 1990s in Ireland. And one of his early projects was at a hospital down on the south of Ireland. And he headed down from Dublin with a team, and they were automating the payroll for the hospital. They were putting one of the first computer systems, a punch card computer system, into a hospital so that it could pay staff. And in all the time that he traveled into the hospital, working there for 6-7 months, each morning he'd come in, and at reception he had to sign his name in a green book and sign his name in a blue book. And every morning he had to sign his name in 2 books in order to gain access to the hospital. And he just interested him, why did you have to do the same thing twice? So after a week or so, he asked the receptionist, tell me, why the green book and the blue book? And the receptionist said, it's always been this way. Which didn't really satisfy my father, but he could see that there wasn't any more coming from reception. And over the next 6 months, he spoke to a lot of the doctors in the hospital, a lot of the staff, the management, the leaders. And at the end of any interview, he'd always pause and say, doctor, every day when I come in, we sign in a green book and we sign in a blue book. Why the 2 books? And almost everyone answered, it's always been this way. At the end of the project, when they'd finally got this payroll system up and working, there was a day where a lot of the emeritus doctors, some of the founding doctors of the hospital, came in for the celebration. And my father got to spend some time with one of the original doctors that had been at the founding of the hospital. And, they talked about this wonderful new automated payroll. And at the end of the conversation, my father asked him the question. And he said, "Doctor, I've asked everyone, I've asked reception, I've asked every manager, why the two books? Why the blue book? Why the green book?" And the emeritus doctor that had been there from the beginning laughed. And he said, "Let me tell you." He said, "In the hospital, we started before the war. And during the war years, there was rationing. And because there was rationing of fuel and rationing of a lot of things, a lot of our doctors and nurses found it difficult to travel to the hospital. So back during the war, the hospital bought bicycles that staff of the hospital could borrow in order to be able to get home and come back." And he said the original use of the green book was to sign out a bicycle. So the blue book was always here to sign in when you arrived to the hospital. The other book was to hire a bicycle so that you could go home for lunch and come back. And it was during the war, during rationing, the hospital put a fleet of bicycles to the service of the employees so that they could get home and back in a way that rationing was making difficult. And he said, and after the war, all the bicycles went, but the blue book continues. And most businesses have an issue like this, that there were things that were started 10, 15, 20 years ago, or even a week ago. And it can be difficult to get them started, but what is much more difficult in a business than getting something started is stopping something. Because often getting something started, there's one person with a vested interest in getting it started. And if you can get their permission and their budget and their go-ahead, you can begin. But there's no single person with the power to stop things. There's no single person who has the vested interest that their rewards and their bonus is paid based on stopping things. And in fact, in a lot of businesses, the only person who really has an incentive to stop things is the most senior leader of the company. And I think this crisis, using it as an opportunity to rethink all of the activities, to rethink all of the competencies, all of the activities of a business, not from the perspective of were we doing it before, we'll do it now, but to start almost from a blank slate, that what are the competencies that we really need to be great at in 5 and 10 years? And start from that perspective as to which activities we invest in. I think one of the great strengths of Steve Jobs was exactly this. The story was that Steve Jobs, so he was sacked from his own company, from Apple, by John Scully and the board. He was visionary, and a lot of times what he seemed to be doing went against common sense. So he was sacked, and Apple under John Scully ended up in printer businesses, in server businesses, in desktop businesses. They were building all sorts of things, and it was struggling. And when Steve Jobs came back into Apple after 2-3 years in the wilderness, I think he built Pixar or got involved with Pixar about this time. When Steve Jobs came back in, the first thing he did was identify 4 products that would remain, and he closed down everything else. And he made sure that those 4 products, everyone who worked in Apple worked only for one. There was nowhere to hide. If you were working for Macintosh, Macintosh's success or failure was your success or failure. And this is so hard to do, to come into a business that has printers that some are selling and some are not, servers some are selling and some are not, desktop computers, graphics computers, and I think the product line after Steve Jobs came through was 4 products alone, down from over 100. Only the something like coronavirus has the power to stop us and think of all the things that we do. If we were to stop 80% of the activity we do, if we were to close down 80% of the products that we currently support and focus on the 20% that really have a future, which would they be and how could we do this? And that's what Steve Jobs did when he came back into Apple. And even to this day, Apple has been very, very, very good at stopping product creep, where they just allow hundreds of products of all different types to creep out. Yeah, this is all something very powerful that Google have been able to do. If you remember, at the beginning of the search engine wars, Yahoo was there and very strong. And Google was almost the upstart competitor against this incumbent of Yahoo. I think Microsoft was already there. If you remember the Yahoo search page, I can remember using Yahoo because that's what I used the first couple of years of searching on the internet. But the Yahoo page was a search bar and then hundreds and hundreds of little categories and links and things and advertisement and colors. The Google homepage, the homepage of one of the most valuable businesses on the planet. If you go to google.com, what do you see? You see a little text box and a button that says search and sometimes a little changing icon on top. I think it takes incredible leadership to stay focused all of these years on one and only one product. But if you imagine, anyone working in YouTube, I'm talking about Yahoo. Anyone working in Yahoo back in the year 2001, 2002, if you ask them, what do you do? We do search, we do this, we do labeling, we do media, you ask anyone working in Google, what do you do? We do search. And it's so hard as a leader to stop things, to close things down, to focus on the 20% of stuff that really matters. In my business, I am so drawn to starting new ideas and creating new things and forcing myself to say we have one product at one price and that's what we do. And until we reach a certain fairly large size, we are not going to introduce a second product. So I think one of the things great businesses that are gonna do as we come out of this COVID-19 lockdown is a real focus on the competencies, the products, the business areas, and the people that really are going to be part of the future. And in the same way Sequoia require each individual to do this 80-20 Pareto rule focus. What are the 20% of your activities that generate the greatest impact? I think for businesses, this is a rare opportunity where in a way your business has been in a coma for 3 months. And in medicine, and I am no doctor, so I'm probably going to make a mess of this, but sometimes when someone has so many severe problems, doctors induce a coma. And under coma, you're able to do a number of treatments that a person who is conscious would not be able to support. And I think there's a similar thing in business today, that our businesses have been in a coma of some sort for 3 months. And coma allows for doctors to intervene in very significant ways that you couldn't do when a business is up and running. I also think digitalization has accelerated a decade over the last 13 weeks. The way, how far we've moved ahead in terms of using video conference, in terms of being able to use digital tools to engage and run our business. I really think the businesses that can focus on the 20% of competencies and products that really are of the future, and make sure that digital is core to every single one of them. And I know AI and robotization is coming in the near future and going to make a big difference. So rebuilding, but rebuilding with a brutal focus on what are the 20% of products that really are our future. What are the 20% of activities that really allow us to succeed? Who are the 20% of customers that are our best customers that we want to focus on in future? And that sort of focus to allow you to rebuild rather than just get back to where you before is the way we need to lead through and make sure that this time of coronavirus is not a crisis. It's a time of rebirth and renewal and creation. You know, in gardening metaphor, a pruning. My mother is a great gardener, and every autumn she prunes. And pruning is cutting off. So if a rose bush has 5 or 6 different branches all growing out, you know, my mum will prune off 3 or 4 of those, so there's one really strong growth. And often if there's 5 branches growing out of a bud, none of them will flower next year. But if you prune 3 of those weaker branches and allow all of the energy of the rose to grow into the 2 remaining branches, you'll get a much more robust flower and plant the next year. So, you know, in gardening, pruning is what allows new growth that is strong to come out. And I guess in business, some degree of pruning driven by a focus on, you know, what are the 20% of our customers that are really the customers we want to serve? What are the 20% of our products that really are our growth engine of the future? What are the 20% of activities that we do that really allow us to deliver the most value through these products to those customers? And even, you know, who are the 20% of our leaders who really are ready to lead in a global digital version of the business? So this would be my thinking about how we don't allow this coronavirus to be a negative thing, but we allow it to be a process of pruning that allows for much, much more vibrant growth in our economies, in our cultures, and in the lives of all of us over the next while. So let's go back here to our thing. We have Dalshan from Kurdistan. Neeraj, how to become an entrepreneur if there is no safety net if it fails? What happens next? This very thought doesn't allow you to take a courageous step. We are also aware how many startups fail. So Neeraj, on failure. So I would say if someone says to me, Conor, I'm going to leave my job and become an entrepreneur, my first question is, how much have you got saved? What's your living expenses? You know, what's your monthly cost of living? And if someone says, you know, my monthly cost of living is 2,000 euros per month, and you know, if you don't have a year of living expenses saved in a bank account, you're not giving yourself a chance to be an entrepreneur. When I interview anyone to join Vistage as the leader of a CEO group, one of the things that I need to see is that they have the financial resources to be able to live earning zero for 12 to 18 months. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to live on zero for the next 18 months, but I need to know that when 4 months comes around, you're not going hungry, that you're not in such a rush for success that you go too fast and break some things. So Neeraj, you know, even in countries with wonderful social nets like Europe, where, you know, health insurance is paid for by the state, even here where there's a social security and a lot of protection, and it's a very close-knit family culture, if you haven't been able to save 1 year of living expenses, then I think it is too soon to make this jump over and be an entrepreneur. Now, there's specific cases where you've been working in something and you know pretty well that the job you've been doing has been training you to be successful as a freelance or as an independent operator. Or you're acquiring a franchise and the deal is good enough and you know that the franchise will work. But I didn't start as an entrepreneur when I was 20. I started as an entrepreneur when I was 29. And when I was 29, I had been an employee of a business that had gone IPO and had given me shares. So, my jump out to be an entrepreneur was not without a decent safety net of money in my bank account. So I would say, Neeraj, absolutely right. Do not leave a paying job crossing your fingers and hoping, unless you have 12 months of living expenses in a bank account. If you and your family are expecting to buy a house in the next year or 2 years, if there's major college expenses coming in the next year or 2 years, it's not just your decision to put the family's finances at risk for your dream. And I think that's something I was not aware of at the beginning. And, I had a marriage that really struggled because I didn't involve my ex-wife in thinking through the financial implications of my life as an entrepreneur. I think I was also far, far too optimistic about how quickly I would become wealthy, how quickly the money would come and how easy it would come as an entrepreneur. Here I am 16 years later, and now in a good year, yes, I make more money than I ever did as an employee. But in the last 3 months, my income depends on being an entrepreneur, and when the market drops, my income has dropped. So the last 3 months, I'm very exposed to the actions of the economy. One of the things that I think entrepreneurship does do for you is make you become really aware of the safety nets that you need to have in place to be able to take a risk. And there's saying that entrepreneurship is risky, but most entrepreneurs seek to reduce risk. Ways that we seek to reduce risk. One, have savings so that you can get through 6 months, 1 year, 1.5 years, 2 years without income. It gives you runway to be able to craft your product and really get it working. Another of the things is this book, The Lean Startup, Eric Ries and Steve Blank, of get customers first. Don't invest in building something until you've got customers, and ideally paying customers. The best source of financing for your startup is prepaid revenues, is buyers prepaying for your product. This is much, much, much better source of financing than venture capital or a loan from a bank. And it also is skin in the game from real users. Maybe it's a harder thing to get there than family finance or your own savings, but it's a real proof that what you're building has great value. So Neeraj, it is risky. So don't jump until you have built yourself a safety cushion. And in my case, what I recommend to people is don't start a startup unless you've got 12 months of living expenses in a savings account. Clearly living expenses change from when you're 20 to 25 to 30 to when you have a family to when you're paying for kids to go through college or you have significant health issues. So the cost per month of your life at 20 is vastly different from the cost per month of your life when you're 35, 40, 45. But Neeraj, this is so important. Success is probably going to come slower than you expect. And very often, when I began as an entrepreneur, I thought, it would be this sort of steady wealth accumulation. I think it's a much more curve like this, the hockey stick, that you wait a lot longer than you expect at a very low income. But then when you start to pull things together, entrepreneurship does have that multiplier effect that once you kind of figure out the rules, your potential income is almost unlimited. Whereas a salary, essentially you're paid because you have some sort of unique skill and you're motivated to show up every day. So your salary is always going to depend on some sort of uniqueness of your skills and some sort of willingness to show up every day and do the politics and go through the motions. As an entrepreneur, with each 5-10 years of your life as an entrepreneur, your need to show up, your need to play politics becomes less and less and less. I also think entrepreneurship is a 30-year game, not a 5-year game. My original thinking when I left behind the corporate world to become an entrepreneur was not start one business, build it and sell it. It was over the next 30 years, I'm going to build 4 businesses. And it's the 4th business that's going to be the one where I've really learned how to do this. I really know who are the people I want to bring in as my leadership team. I really have a reputation amongst investors and bankers and regulators and great employees of being someone that you want to be associated with. And I think you need to think about entrepreneurship in this way, that it is not a next 5 years career plan. It is a decision to dedicate the rest of your life to building a reputation as a good leader of people, a good, trustworthy manager of money, someone who, when you give your word, you go out of your way to make sure that your word is truly kept in everything that you do. I think it's the 3rd business that I started, we raised a couple of rounds of venture capital. And after 3 years, I just realized the business was not going to take off in the way that I had hoped. And I remember a summer, this would be back in 2005, 2006, 2007, around there, where I was just thinking, I can't, we've had 2 rounds of venture capital and I'm still in the guts of my business. I've not become strategic. I don't like my life. I don't really like the day-to-day of what I'm doing. And I just thought, I can't do this. I can't do this for the next 10 years. I can't even do this now for the next month. And we sold the business. We sold it for quite a loss. And over the next 5 years, I paid back personally the money that had been invested by the venture capital companies into the business, which at a personal level was a major blow to the income that I had available for home, for schooling, for vacation for the next 5 years. But it was a moral decision of mine. I felt that it was me losing my motivation, that maybe this business would have succeeded, but I just wasn't willing to live the life that would have been required by me for the next decade to build the business out to what it could be. Therefore, I felt it was my moral responsibility, since I'd given my word to the investors that I was going to build this. If I was going to break my word, I needed to give back the money. And I think there's a case in the business school, IESE, about this. Well, certainly talked about, because one of the investors was the Entrepreneurial Investment Fund of the business school. And I didn't do it for the reputation, but I guess in the years since, I've noticed that it really did affect my reputation as an honest, trustworthy person to do business with. That as an employee, you have a different attitude towards your word and your bond, and you can break promises because it's not really going to stay with you. But if you're an entrepreneur, you got to be really careful not to break your word. That your reputation becomes so much valuable if you can show consistently year after year after year that when you give a promise, you will live up to that promise. And if you have to break the promise, you call the person the day that you know that you're going to break the promise. You go and see them. You let them know what's happening. You let them know how you're going to resolve it. You call them day after day until the situation is resolved. When taxijet, when we realized that Lehman Brothers going bankrupt was going to wipe us out, we had 16 aircraft. And from the day that Lehman Brothers went bankrupt and I became aware that our business was really struggling, every day I called every one of those 16 aircraft owners to say, we have no new answers, but I'm going to keep calling you until we have clarity about what's going to happen. And how you respond in the real negative times is where you really forge your reputation. I guess the leaders now who are making sacrifices, the leaders now who've sacrificed some benefits to themselves, their salary to themselves, who have really stayed there with people who've needed them, and been a motivating force, been an encourager, even when they themselves are struggling. Right now they may be doubting the value of it, but I guarantee next year, in 2 years, and 3 years, and 4 years, people will not forget the leaders that stood up and were by your side, the leaders that really supported people, that really understood and helped people get clarity when times were tough. So, if you were an entrepreneur through this last 3-year period, this has been an incredible time to forge your reputation, to show people how you act when things are difficult. Anyone can be magnanimous when there's loads of money and the market's growing. The question is how the leaders acted now, how the leaders responded now, whether they disappeared back to their homes and they hid, or they were out there supporting and encouraging and allowing people to see that they're there. Even though we're struggling, I'm here with you. So, there, to me, the entrepreneurial life is one where you become absolutely accountable for results. And I think this is a wonderful clarifier. To me, nothing teaches us better than natural consequences. If you climb a mountain and you forget your coat and it gets cold, you will get very cold. That's called natural consequences. The wonderful thing of getting very cold once because you forgot your coat is you will never forget your coat again. Entrepreneurship gives so many experiences where hopefully your company stays alive and your finances stay alive through it. But with each of the blows, you learn so much more as an entrepreneur than when you're protected by a salary or when you're not directly required to generate results. So let's go back to our chat cam here, and let me see, we have a pretty good session today. I think, is my thing saying we've had 700 people connected over the last hour. So we're now back on our questions. Word Doge, is it too late to be an entrepreneur after 45? No. I think the famous one is the founder of Kentucky Fried Chicken, started at 69. So it's never too late. And I think a lot of the statistics show that it's entrepreneurs in their 40s that are the most successful in terms of creating businesses that survive and thrive. The few examples such as Mark Zuckerberg or Sergey Brin and Larry Page, Google and Facebook, that started in their 20s, these are rare. They're very visible outliers, but they're not the statistical norm. The more successful, thriving entrepreneur is not someone who started at 20 and had a lucky break. I think Word Doge, if you're 45 or like me 47, this is one of the optimal times where you have the right balance of enough experience to really know what the world is and needs and how it works. And you also still have, I'd say, today, the life expectancy of a 45-year-old in Western Europe, if you take moderate care of your health, eat fairly well, eat your veg, do a little bit of exercise, you're going to live to 90. So you're only halfway. And if you think at 45, the first 20 years of your life, they weren't your choice. So you've only had 25 years so far where you got to choose your life. And you've got 50 more years to go. So the question at age 45, where do you want to be when you're 55? Where do you want to be when you're 65? And for me, the decision on being an entrepreneur was shaped by that long-term view much more than whether I could make money in 2 years or 10 years. I'm now 16 years into an entrepreneurial career. And I'm still, the curve of starting to see the rewards being worth the sacrifices. Because, there's post MBA, there was definitely a much easier financial path for me to follow of taking any good MBA job and just sticking with it and staying with the politics. So the entrepreneurial life, I think, needs to be viewed over a 30 to 40 year time horizon. And 45, you're still going to be around when you're 65. Retirement in 20 years is not going to be the government pays you 2/3 of your salary to go away. I think we're going to have to rethink retirement in a significant way. If you can build a life, build an activity where you get paid, with 1 week a month, you get paid to do something that you would do for free, that you love to do with people that you really enjoy being with, that is worth starting building today. So yeah, Abir, I like Doja's question as well. KFC is always a good example, Jinosh. Maria Luisa, que bien. Maria, you are strong enough. I've been reading a book with my daughter, Who Moved My Cheese? And one of the things I meant to do today is recommend this book. It's a small fable written by Spencer Johnson, Who Moved My Cheese? And it is so apt for the times we are living in now, the times where a change happened to us. And it's hard to accept that this change has taken away our summer plans. It's hard to accept that this change has taken away our dreams and reduced our income and changed our travel ability. And I love the book. It's a silly story about 2 mice and 2 little people in a maze. It's a story I'm reading now with my 4-year-old daughter, and she is getting some good stuff from it. I'm getting a lot about how to get the right mindset to navigate changes that you didn't expect, changes that take away the comfortable life that you had ready for yourself. So Roger, great to have you here, Roger. And extremely important, don't start a startup without having 1 to 2 years of income in the bank. And I think whether you're going to ever start a startup or not, this is a basic discipline of anyone living in a Western economy. Put away enough savings. If you can do that, then you have the fiscal discipline to be able to run a business. If you can't save enough of a salary to put away over the next 2 years, enough to be able to live off your savings for 6 months, then you're really screwed. And you shouldn't launch an entrepreneur because you're lacking a fundamental discipline that will be required as an entrepreneur. So Ruhan has another suggestion of over 45 entrepreneur, Ray Kroc from McDonald's. I think he was also in his 60s. Lily Duan, Taipei, thank you very much for your comment. And I guess what I learned is when you're honest, in reality, the only thing I have is my own story. And it's taken me a long time to be willing to share what's happened to me, what's gone well, and most importantly, what hasn't gone well. But perhaps, when I had a business go bankrupt in 2008, 2009, most of 2009, I was not in a good place. I felt like I was the victim of a cruel world and this had happened to me. And the way that I took a perspective that gave sense to my life, that gave sense to why I've lost all my money, why I've lost my marriage, why I have no money in the bank account and I can't pay my daughter's school fees. And it really, I was 34 years old. I had an MBA. I had a degree from a good university. I had 10 years of a good corporate job. It just shouldn't happen to me that I have lost everything, but it did. And after a year of feeling like a victim of a cruel world, the way I got a sense of meaning was that this had happened to me so that I could share it with others so that it didn't happen to them. And that my role for the rest of my life is to use my experience to help others not go as low as I got back in 2009. And that what I have received in living through a company go bankrupt, in living through a divorce, in living through my own ego and my arrogance being the seeds of my own disaster is, one, I thought, I'm so grateful it happened at 34, not at 65, because I have 90 years left to live a life where I have learnt such important lessons about life. So we're gonna pull it to an end here. But yeah, Daniel, time does fly when we connect. Jagannath, thank you. I'm glad you liked the 30-30, 80-20, 90-10 story. I think I share it in an old video or on my blog somewhere. It's such an important thing. Harshad, what's your definition of standard of living? Oh, like there. I've got a good story here, Harshad. So maybe as we come to 6:15, I'm going to share a story just on standard of living and this idea. So a story, there's a wise man many years ago in a kingdom, and the wise man is sat at the edge of the road to the palace, and he's eating a bowl of lentils. And as he sat on the ground eating a bowl of lentils, one of the courtesans of the king is walking along dressed in his fine robes, and he looks and he sees the wise man on the ground eating lentils. And the courtesan, the courtier to the king, stops and he says, "Wise man, if you could learn to please the king, you would not have to eat lentils." And the wise man looks back at the well-dressed courtier and he says, "Courtier, if you could learn to eat lentils, you would not need to please the king." And I think standard of living, Harshad, teaching yourself to be happy with what you have now, teaching yourself to be grateful every day for the things that you have. And for me, I realize the quality of the relationship I have with my daughters is worth more than any money, any success, any status, any number of YouTube subscribers or followers. The relationship I have with my brothers and my sister and my parents, the fact that we get on with each other, this is worth more than any money. I've seen, I've got to know a lot of very wealthy people over these last years. When you sell private jets, you get to connect with some very, very wealthy families, some newly wealthy and some ancient family wealth families. And once you get to know what wealth does to a family, it takes incredible systems and strength and work on the part of family leaders for wealth not to tear a family apart. I have seen so many families that have been torn apart over the family business, over the distribution of wealth from the family business. There's so few family businesses that go on a couple of generations. I remember I met a couple of people from the CNA clothing business. CNA is, I don't know how they're doing now, but it's into about their 5th generation of family. And CNA have such a careful work on how to develop family members' mindset and values and attitude towards the business, so that they are both guardians and stewards of the business. To me here, standard of living, if you're happy now, you're happy with life. If you're not happy now, nothing outside you is going to make you happy. No change outside you is going to give you joy. If you can stop right now, there's a million things you can look at and feel joy. There's also a million things you can look at and feel sad and feel worse and feel poor. But teaching yourself right now to look at the things that give you a feeling of gratitude. One of the things that I see is that money amplifies who you are. if you're an arse, money just amplifies what a big arse you're going to be. If you're cruel, money just amplifies your capacity and the range of people that will suffer your cruelty. If you're kind and you're poor, when you're rich, you'll be kind to many, many people. It's not that, I think who you are now, money will just amplify. And the more money you have, the harder it is to shift that strength. So develop a great personality right now with whatever you have. Develop an ability to be grateful right now with whatever you have. Develop an ability to put your attention on others and what they need. And how you achieve great wealth, solve lots of people's problems. If you increase the quality of life for other people, you'll become wealthy. And if you can increase the quality of life for many other people, you'll become very wealthy. And what entrepreneurship is, deep down, there's no, yes, there are individual cases that game the system, but on the whole, if you're to be an entrepreneur, you must improve quality of life for people. If you do that, money will come. If you don't do that, the business will close. You can cheat yourself and deceive yourself and delude yourself that what you think you're doing is increasing value for other people. But if no one pays you money, it's because probably you are not doing something that makes their life better. Or you're flawed in your ability to transmit to them in a trustworthy manner that they can trust you to make their life better. But I think this idea, if you're happy now, you're happy. If you're not happy now, you're not happy. If you're waiting for something outside to change the way you feel about life, nothing's going to happen. You need to decide inside yourself right now that, and to me, the way I summarize this will be faith, hope, and love. Faith is everything you've done was the best you could have done. The decision you took at 20, at 30, and at 40 was the best decision you could have taken. Whether it was good or it was bad, it was the best that you could do at that age. And today, the decision you take, in 10 years' time, you might look back and regret, but it was the best decision that you could take, knowing what you know, being who you are right now. And faith is that it's worth it, that there's a place for you. If you pay attention, the universe has a lot of clues for you. Hope, action changes the future. Taking action changes where we're going. And taking action can be as simple as picking up the phone and calling a friend, picking up the phone and calling your father, your mother, your brother, your sister. And love is put other people at the center of what your questions in your mind at. If you ask yourself in your head, what do I get from this live stream? What do I get from this session with Conor? What do I get from building a business? This is about you. That's not love. Love is about putting other people at the center of the questions that you ask in your head. I've stopped asking what's in it for me. From the age of 34, the only questions I allow in my head are, what does my daughter need from me today? What does my wife need from me today? What are the 80 people currently connected to the YouTube live stream need from me today? And if you serve others, and don't delude yourself that what you think, that you think you know what they want, but really make sure you get a sense of what other human beings struggle with, what their dreams are, what their hopes are, what quality of life really is, and you work to help them get there, the money will come. Money is a means. It is not an ends. The ends needs to be something else. If you have a very clear plan for what you would do with a lot of money, money's going to come to you. But if your aim is to have 30 million so you can have a big house, a big car, and all your problems go away, that's not a vision. That's a self-centered, personal benefit goal. Money's not going to come to someone who just wants money. Money and resources and good people come into the life of someone who has a vision that's going to make many people's life better. And I think as an entrepreneur, if your business success just makes you wealthy, it's going to be a real struggle to recruit good people, to get investors, to get resources, to get customers that really want to help you grow. Whereas if you turn it around and you build a business to make life better for others, life gives and takes, and it's always in balance. If you try to take, you better be giving. And if you're giving, the world will put it back to you. So things stay in balance. So on that note, let's switch back to chat. What I'd love is, again, one word, if you were to share one word, your emotional state as we come to the end of this 1 hour and 20-minute live stream. So today we've gone along a little bit longer than some of the previous live streams. But thanks for some of your great questions. And Gordon, great example of servant leadership to serve others. I think for me, I learn by talking. I learn by dialogue. I learn by engaging with others. So, in a way, for me, this is a self-serving. But what I've kind of learned is if I can take something from you, which is using your presence here to help me get clear, help me remember what's important, then it does tend to help other people at the same time. So Maria, motivated; Bob, curious; Gordon, grateful; Cyprian, confident; Jinosh, thank you; Andre, you joined the Michael Gallant podcast. Yep, that was a great conversation with Michael. Janath, great, glad you enjoyed today. Andre, glad you're motivated. Joachim, grateful. Word dodge, congruent. I like that word. Devotional, you didn't bring a question today, but you learned. That's still good. You can bring a question next time. Devotional. Arancha, inspired. So on this note, we're going to bring today's session towards a close. Harshad, grateful, energetic. Reno, thankful. Linda, New York City, blessed. Pugas Hendy, persuaded myself. Ethan, hey, Ethan, great to have you on here. Ethan, congratulations on being Atlanta's 40 under 40. Great to see you being recognized for your sharing of the light. Abir, have a great one. We're going to go to end this stream now. Have a great weekend, all of you. Trolovich, pleasure.